right. Welcome. Thank you so much for having me, and so much for Don for reaching out. It's been ages since I've presented with this group, and I don't think I've ever done the group, but I did that SharePoint Saturday back in 2019. So I am very happy to be here. Thank you so much. And this is the intro to Power Apps customized list forms. So this is a session that was actually one of the first ones I ever did. It's really a war story of how I learned how to use Power Apps for the SharePoint list customization. And I really want this to be a session where you can follow along. You can go back to your desk and do this right away. Like, it's really supposed to be an interactive, hands-on, something you can get started with right away. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So let's go on here. But I like to throw these in. I got these from the Power Platform conference a couple years ago. I think that these are really valuable for anyone who attends a user group, is probably interested in joining the Microsoft community or learning more about the products. So I threw in 2 slides. If you haven't heard of the Microsoft Power Up program, it's really taking off. This is a guided hands-on they do like a whole curriculum. It's like a 12-week program. And then at the end of it, you get a certification voucher, so you can get a certification in Power Platform. But it's really a way for you to skill up in the Power Platform if you're interested. You have to go in and apply. I included the link there to go out there and apply and take a look at the site. This has really took off in the last couple of years. So I wanted to throw that in. And then also, if you're not part of the Microsoft community, you should probably join it. There's some links here. If you have never been to a community call, I think those are probably my favorite thing of the whole Microsoft community. They do various calls once a month. There's a Power Platform one, there's an M365 one. This is just a little short 1-hour call, and it's usually about 15 minutes of updates, and then they do 3 different presenter demos, and they're little short bite-sized presentations. They're only about 15 minutes, and all they do is show you something that they've built in using a Power Platform product or something in M365. So it's a really great way to get some inspiration to say, like, I didn't know you could do that. Just some little nuggets of info from the community. So I highly encourage you to check that out. So I've included some links there to attend those calls. So who am I? So my name is Heidi Jordan. I am a senior consultant with Modern Workplace at Avanade. I am a Microsoft MVP for business applications, and I am from Sioux Falls, South Dakota, so just down the road. Like I said, I am fluent in all things SharePoint, on-prem, online, the dreaded InfoPath, designer, all those things. My tagline is SharePoint girl living in a Power Platform world, because SharePoint is my first love and will always be, but I've really taken off with Power Platform in the past couple of years. So up on the screen is my contact information. I do have a blog that has some Power Platform resources and stuff. I am not active as I should be, but there's my contact information if you want to follow me or get in touch with me. Feel free to do so. The QR code will take you to my blog, so that's what that is up there for, but I will put this up at the end of the presentation as well. All right, so the agenda for this session is I'm just going to kind of go over some of the groundwork of the, I know most of this group knows this, but what is a list? What's a SharePoint list? What's a Microsoft list? Can you use this stuff in Microsoft lists, etc.? And then we're going to go through an actual 6-step process to get started by using these customized list forms. And then at the end of it, I want to wrap up and talk about some things that you should consider before you even do this, and just kind of wrap up all the steps that we went over together. So I cannot really see the chat or anything, Michelle. So if you want to stop me, if there's any questions or anything, or raise your hand, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, you bet. I think we've got a whole board on here that's willing to interrupt.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. So my story, real quick story. So when I was, living my SharePoint days, I started a new job at a bank as a SharePoint designer. And when I interviewed for this position, I was all SharePoint on-prem skills, InfoPath, designer. That was kind of my world. I interviewed for this position, and I asked the bank, I said, what are your thoughts on going to SharePoint Online? And they said, oh, we're ready. We got the licensing. Like, we want to do this. So I'm like, okay, wonderful. This is awesome. So I took the job and I showed up day one, we're going to get them to SharePoint Online. This is going to be awesome. And they said that my first project was to eliminate their third-party workflow system. Okay, what does that entail? So I took this new job that they were not in SharePoint Online yet. They had this third-party workflow system. I knew that the what we needed to do was use Power Apps and Power Automate. This was right around the 2018 time, so I knew that that was the hot thing and that Power Platform was going to be the future. So this session was really derived from that challenge in my journey doing that. How did I replace their solutions with Power Apps and SharePoint, and how did all those, what did I struggle with? When you do this, what are you going to struggle with? And I want to point out some of these things that are not so obvious, things I spent way too much time researching, because I want to get you going on the right track if you're even thinking about taking this journey. So let's get some of the groundwork here. So what is a SharePoint list? I'm sure most of the people in this audience know what a SharePoint list is, but a SharePoint list is really just a place. It's essentially an Excel spreadsheet that lives inside of SharePoint. It's a way for you to track, data, dates, any sort of metadata, basically tracking a list of items is a SharePoint list. So what you're looking at on the screen is just an example of like a policy revision request for some document control system. We've got a list of some documents here for the title field, like the date it was submitted, the department approval date. You can see there's a little bit of formatting going on. That's one of the awesome things about SharePoint lists is you can apply some conditional formatting. And then right in the middle of the screen is like a hover over that's done with a little bit of JSON. So you can do some little bit of customization right within the actual SharePoint list there. So it's really just an electronic way of tracking things in SharePoint. All your lists are stored in the site contents, which I'm sure most people are familiar with, but that's where you can get to all of your lists. But then I start to think like, okay, so what is a Microsoft list? What is a SharePoint list? So if you boil it down, they're essentially the same backend. But the difference is that Microsoft lists are really available via an app. So when you go to the waffle menu, you can click on Microsoft lists, and this is a roll-up of all the lists that you have out there, both Microsoft and SharePoint lists that you have access to, essentially. So it's kind of just, instead of having to hop around to all the different SharePoint sites that you follow or that you partake in, it's really a roll-up of all of those lists just in one place. There is kind of one major difference, though, is when you do create a Microsoft list, it'll create it under your OneDrive, but the SharePoint lists that are created on SharePoint sites. So that's kind of the biggest difference that I was seeing between the two. But when you look at Microsoft lists and you open it up, it looks the exact same. You might just see a little bit difference in the ribbon. There might be a little bit more formatting, but everything I'm going to talk about today can be used in Microsoft lists as well. So then I get this question a lot too, is why would I want to use SharePoint list as a data source? So there's a couple of reasons why. SharePoint lists or lists in general are really easy to create. They are, it's a very intuitive interface. It's very easy to change the records too. If you're using a database for a backend in your forms, there's only a select number of people that can actually get in there to change records if you need to. So it's really easy to change things. They're great for visibility. Like I showed you before, the custom formatting that was on there, like the coloring, like it's very easy to give your users a little, an insight into what is in that database, essentially. You can create a SharePoint view for them so they can only see the things that are relevant to them. So SharePoint is great for visibility. It's also included in most of the Microsoft 365 licensing. So basically everything I do today, you can go create right now if you have an M365 license. And also it's really easy for other integrations. So if you create a SharePoint list and you've got some request list, people are going to want a workflow to go with it. You're going to need some Power Automate or something like that. And those integrations are either built right into the list or it's really easy to integrate the two. So those are the good things about using SharePoint lists. There are some challenges. SharePoint is not a relational database. It is not a database. Do not use it if you need a bunch of lookups or need to tie a bunch of data together. That is definitely a good instance for Dataverse or SQL. SharePoint does have some threshold limits. So, when you get to that 5,000 mark is kind of the rule of thumb. That's when you start to see some degraded performance, permissions issues. Sometimes the filtering doesn't work. So if you're going to have more than like 5,000 records in your list at one time, then you need to be concerned with this. Also, when you create this customized list form like we're going to do today, you can't copy it to another location. So if you want to go ahead and create this beautiful customized list form and then copy it over to a test site, it won't go with it. So that is when you would want to do a full-blown Canvas app in Power Apps. But all the skills that we're going to look at today are also applicable to those Canvas apps. Just be aware that these customized list forms cannot, be copied from location to location. And also, these forms can be difficult to locate. So we're customizing the actual input form of a SharePoint list, it doesn't show, like when you open up Power Apps and you see the screen like that has your solutions and all the forms are listed out, it will not show in there. So they can be difficult to locate. So here's kind of the trio of tools, still going through the groundwork here. So we all know SharePoint. We came from on-prem to online. In SharePoint on-prem, our chosen forms designer was generally InfoPath, and now we're going to be using Power Apps, which is the gold star, which is what we're going to look over today. And then there are some additional options for just list formatting using JSON, and I'm also going to show that. And then going down the line a little bit there, for workflow, we generally used SharePoint Designer or some kind of third-party workflow solution. And then now we use Power Automate. So that's kind of like how this all maps together in the blocks. And I did mention InfoPath. I said it out loud. I apologize. And I did run this through Copilot to see if I should use InfoPath to create my new request forms. And it did spit out an answer, which is not entirely correct. It says discontinued since 2021. It has been gone way longer. Like, I distinctly remember the conference Michelle was talking about, the M365 conference that used to be the SharePoint conference in 2014 in Las Vegas, when they actually had a funeral for InfoPath. They had a Grim Reaper walking around. Like, it was very extra. So it is not recommended to use InfoPath. If you are using InfoPath, you need to stop right now. And please take my instructions of what we're going to do in this video today. Start looking at the Power Apps or some other third-party forms solution. And I did include the link there to the support update, which it looks like we've already went over the updates at the beginning of the meeting. But moral of the story, let's use Power Apps. All right, so now before we start the 6-step process, and once I get into the 6-step process, this is going to be mostly demo. So almost done with the slides here. But I think that, you know, it helps people understand my journey in this challenge is if you can understand the business cases that we were doing. So there were 2 main business cases that I had when I was replacing the third party with Power Apps. So the first one was document control solution. It's just that basically a site that has a bunch of policies, procedures, things that are required for like multi-level approvals every year. You know, this procedure needs to be signed off by the doc owner, department approver, committee, board, etc. So it's basically a library of documents and then a workflow process behind it. And then also there was a project submission solution. So this is kind of the same thing, just a library of enterprise documents that were assigned some sort of project number, and there were supplemental documents that go with that. And then if you wanted to request a new project, you would fill out a form and do that electronic form process. So those are the 2 things that I was really aiming to replace from that third-party solution. So moving on to the actual 6-step process. The first step is learn the tools, which is way easier said than done, I understand. But starting from the left here, I think the first step, what helped me the most, the first step is just get familiarized with the actual designer of Power Apps. So I'm going to quickly flash over to the designer. So if you just open the designer, like this is what it shows you when you get started with Power Apps. Like this is not very helpful to me. So I wanted to look at all these things. I wanted to know what all those things did, all those buttons and, you know, all the fields, and click on everything. Don't do that because you'll just overwhelm yourself and then you'll think it's too difficult to learn. So going back, look into some free courses, find a video, find a community day, find an event, find something that someone is actually doing something in Power Apps and watch them. So watch what they're clicking on. You know, they're probably going to about 20% of the controls that are actually on the designer. So find out what the more common ones are and find out what they're using so you can kind of get familiar with the editing tool. I did link it in here, but Shane Young has a free intro course to Power Apps. I think it's like 11 hours or something. It's pretty significant, and I did put a link to it in the back of this slide deck. So I think that's a great way to get started with this. Second thing is make a list of concepts that you want to learn and then work through those, because I promise someone has already learned the concept and there's a video out there on YouTube probably of how to do it. Or there's a community called Demo or something like that, that someone has already done what you want to do. And taking that a little bit more granular. So think about some of those concepts of what do you want to do and how, if you were using InfoPath prior, how would you do that in Power Apps? So for example, when InfoPath, when you would submit a form and it would hit SharePoint, the naming convention would have like the form number and then a date and maybe the name from the title column. Think about how Power Apps does that, and how does it actually name forms when they come in? Like when you attach something to this Power App, like where does it go? Can you leverage it? Like can you move it somewhere? What about cascading dropdowns? I think that was the #1 request when using InfoPath. That's why people didn't use the SharePoint list forms out of the box, is because they wanted cascading dropdowns. So then they would turn everything into InfoPath or designer custom forms, something like that. And then also conditional visibility. You know, if I have a new form, I only want to show these fields. But if we're editing the item, I want to show more. So how do you do some of those things in Power Apps? And once you have those figured out, apply them to your main concepts. So if we're thinking about those applications that I started with, that document control. So for document control, the end user will submit a request form to modify like a policy, and then they will attach that policy to the form. So after they submit the form, I'm going to grab that policy and I'm going to put it in an in-progress library. So then they can make all the edits, and then when it's approved, we'll move it back to the regular policy library. And then for project management, kind of the same thing. You submit a request, you attach a bunch of documents. They should go to the supplemental doc library and be numbered with a project number. So my main concept here is when I attach something to this form, this Power App form, I want to move it to somewhere in SharePoint. So that was the very small use case I started with to build this whole process. All right, so we're on step 3. We're going to actually get into the demo now. So let me flip over to a different screen. All right, so this is the example of the SharePoint list here. So actually I'm going to open up a different one. This is the end result. I think that this kind of helps show though. So this is a SharePoint list that has a custom Power App behind it. So I have just a standard policy revision request list. I've got some columns here, you know, the review status of the actual form submission, the title of it, the date it was submitted, a little bit of metadata about it, and then some workflow columns. So what we're going to be doing here is actually when you have your SharePoint list and you click new, the form that pops up, this is actually a Power App. So generally you would see just the plain SharePoint input form. We can use Power Apps to actually customize this input form. And you can see that there's a lot going on here. I've got some cascading drop-down relationships. This is pulling from the policy library, only the departments that are there. And based on what you click here, it'll populate this one, that cascading drop-down relationship I was talking about. So this is what we're actually going to build today. So that kind of just gives you the full overview. So let's start from scratch though. So let's say I am doing this for the first time. And sorry, I'll go over here. I just have a project submission list. So first thing I'm going to do is I actually create my SharePoint list, and then I need to create the columns. You have to work backwards when you're building these forms. You have to think about all the data you want to collect from the user and build columns for them. So then when you build your Power App, you're pushing your data from your Power App to your SharePoint form. So in this instance, I have a very basic, just a title, a submitter, which is a person column, and then a project status. So I only have 3 columns here. But to get started, you just click on this integrate button and then Power Apps, and we're going to do customize forms. So I'm going to click on that and we're going to hope it goes pretty quickly here. Shouldn't be too bad. Is there any questions while this is loading up?
No questions, just a lot of conversation.
Wonderful.
And the fact that Tom Duff did admit that he loves InfoPath still, you know, we're gonna have to take that as a side meeting.
I'll have a chat with him later.
Yeah, please.
All right, so we clicked on that customize forms. And like I said, this is the designer that comes up. So you will see your form here and okay, I'm taking you through my very first experience with this. So I did customized forms. I had all my fields in here. It's like, this is wonderful. I want to see what this form looks like before I even touch it. Like, I just want to take a look. So if you click on, we're looking here, we take a look at the preview of this. And this is what you'll see when you very first load up the form. You see no item to display. I'm like, okay, I broke it. Like, I didn't even do anything yet. I was so frustrated. I think I deleted it 3 or 4 times and started over. What you have to understand is that the SharePoint form is right here. If you look on the side, this default mode. So because I started with an empty list, there are no records in that list for it to show in this form designer. So make sure you flip your default mode to new. And then when you click on this, then you'll be able to see your fields here. If you started from a list that had some records in it, and then you previewed it, this would look just fine. But just be aware, if you start with an empty list, you need to make sure you click here on the SharePoint form and change the default mode to new. Oops, sorry, didn't mean to, let me get this back. Oh. All right, so I want to take a look at, just take a step back and look at the actual designer, a quick overview of the whole screen. Like I mentioned, this can be quite intimidating if you aren't used to using it. So start on the left side. So when you click on things, it'll actually highlight them for you. So when I click on the form screen, this is just basically whatever is behind that SharePoint form that I've added or that I'm customizing for Power Apps. But if I click on the SharePoint form, it actually highlights the region for me. So within my SharePoint form, I'm going to expand this. I have 4 things. I've got attachments, my project status, submitter, and title. So those are the fields that you can see here on the form. So if I want to expand this a little further, I'm going to click into, the fields are called data cards. If I click into this title data card, there should be 4 different things about the, oops, sorry, I zoomed in too much. There's 4 different really aspects about this title data card. If I click on the data card value 1, that's my actual input. That is what's going to be collecting the text from this form. And then I can also customize and get very granular with the customization here. I can even customize what the error message says. If I want the star visible for required, if something's required, it shows that little star on the top. I can customize that. And then also the label of what is showing on my form here. Sorry, I'll zoom that in. And when I click through these things, it does highlight them for me. So that's kind of the left side. What you need to know is that you've got your form screen area, the SharePoint form, which is what actually submits the data to SharePoint, and then the 4 different fields that I have on my form here. One other thing is with these, you can rename them. So if, this is the title data card, I know this is, I can read that here, that this is going to be submitting the title to my SharePoint list, but this data card value 1 doesn't really tell me much about that. So you can rename these, and it is encouraged to do that, because if you start doing some formulas, you're going to want to know what that field is so that you don't have to use data card value 1. So to rename the field there, you just click on the ellipsis, and then you can do rename. And then I like to do that with title underscore and then txt, so I know it's a text field. Or do DD for dropdown, or something like that, so that you know what type of field it is. All right, so that is the designer interface there. One other quick tip about this is, first of all, I mentioned that you need to change the default mode to new. The other thing you should do right away is decide if you're going to use your form in portrait or landscape mode. So if you want to use it in landscape, meaning it'll give you a much bigger real estate on your SharePoint list, you just have to come into the settings here and then display. And right here is right now you see it's in portrait, so it's going to just display on the right sidebar of your SharePoint page. I'm going to change this to landscape and click apply. So it's going to be a much bigger form this way. Do this right away, because if you don't and you format your form, and then you come in and change this, it will mess with all of your formatting. So make sure you decide right from the beginning if you want landscape or portrait, and come change it right away. So now I have a much bigger form to work with, a lot more real estate. Any questions on that piece thus far? Just the fields and the screen here.
Yeah, nothing in the chat.
Okay, awesome. Let's continue then. So that was step 3, really, is get started. Click that button, get your form. All right, so step 4 is the customize the new and edit forms. So when you're working in InfoPath, or really with any form, if you're going to send a user a new form, you may want to hide some fields for them. Like, for example, the project submission. You send them a a form to submit a project, you probably don't want them to select the project status. It's going to default as new. They don't need to see the project status. You can just go ahead and hide that from the new form, but then like once you go and edit that data, you probably want that to be visible. So there's a couple different ways that you can customize those various forms in Power Apps. So then let me show you the different methods. So let's go to this one here. So I have this project submission form here. And as I mentioned, when this form is new, I don't want people to see this project status field. But if they're editing it, I do want them to see it. So what you can do is over here again on the left side where we have the screens, you can actually duplicate your screens so that you have 3 different versions of this screen. So to do that, I could just click on the ellipsis and I can click duplicate screen. And then it's going to create me a new screen with everything, you know, all the fields that are on it essentially. So let me delete that. And then I can just rename them for what they're for. So this one I've called the create screen. So this is the new item screen. Then when I want people to edit it, they're going to be sent to this edit screen. So first of all, I need to hide that project status, as I mentioned, for the create screen. So what I'm going to do here is click on project status. And then there's a property up here called visible. We're going to go over these controls here a little bit later, so bear with me here. But we want this property to be visible. And we're just going to change this to false. So then that's hidden. So now when I preview this, I don't see that project status field because I'm looking at the new form. But if I'm on my edit form, then I will be able to see that there. You can also test this. Actually, no, just kidding. That's the next method. But so I'm duplicating that. And then how does it actually know what to load up? That's in the SharePoint integration piece. If you click on the SharePoint integration and you come over here to the advanced properties, right here, these various actions, it'll say on new. So this is saying, okay, when someone is creating a new form, what do you want me to load up? So I want it to load up that create item form. And then when it's on edit, I want it to use the edit item form or the edit screen. All of this information I have linked in the slides in the back with the code snippets and the process of exactly how to do this. So I don't want to focus too much on that. I just want to show you that is where you can connect the two. So you have your various screens, and then this is where you say when to load it up. So that's the first method, is the duplicating screens and then customizing each one from there. As some of you might already be thinking, like if I have a whole bunch of fields, like this is a pain. I don't want to, you know, create 3 screens for every single app I have and then try and maintain all that. So there's a different method that you can use. So if we look at this example, same project submission form, but if I want to hide this project status when the form is new, there is actually a property for that. So on the visible, I'm just going to put if SharePoint form 1 dot, and this is mode, I think, mode equals. So here you can do 0, 1, and 2. 1 is new. So if the form is in new mode, then false, because I don't want to see this. Otherwise, true. So now you'll see that it hid the form there, or sorry, it hid the field for project status. And now I can test with this by clicking on my SharePoint form here. We're in the default mode new right now. So if I change this to edit, you should see that field come back. And there it is right there. So this is another way that you can test if you're doing those, if you're doing expressions like this to show and hide fields, that you can just use the default mode to test with it. Again, the expression was this, the if SharePoint form mode equals 1, then false, then true. Does that make sense? Hopefully. I want to recap that. I've got a slide here to recap that. So the 2 different methods that we looked at there were the duplicate form screens. So remember that if you duplicate the form screens, you have 3 screens to maintain. So if you make a change on, you know, your new form screen, like a different color or something like that, you have to make that change to your edit screen as well, just to keep your app consistent. And then the other method is that same form, and we just use expressions to customize the visibility. This is great if you have a small number of fields. But if you have a form that has a ton of fields, this is probably going to be a headache to maintain that. So 2 different methods that do the same thing, just really what works best for you. Any questions on form screens? We're looking.
Nope, none in the chat.
Perfect, looking good. All right, so step 5 is consider your form design. So let's go back to the form itself. And so I will give InfoPath a little bit of credit that InfoPath design was way easier than Power Apps design. So they allowed you to just, you could open your form, you could insert a table, you could merge cells, you could just line things up very, very easily. So it is not that simple in Power Apps. There's a lot more you can do in Power Apps. You can make it look way cooler than InfoPath, but InfoPath really had that one for the beginners. They definitely have a leg up there. But there are some simple things you can do for design on your Power App so it doesn't look so blah. For example, first of all, there are columns options. So we're going to be modifying the SharePoint Form 1 here. And then if I click on the properties, there is a columns option. So I can do, I can do a 1-column form. I could change this to 3. I can, you have some options there for that. There's also the snap to columns option. So when I'm in a 2-column form here, I don't have a lot of flexibility. It's either going to be full or I can leave it half, full or half. Like, it doesn't allow me to kind of put it like 3/4 of the way in the middle here, unless I turn off that snap to columns. So if I turn that off, then I'm in here. I get a little bit more flexibility of how wide I want this to be. So I can do, a little bit more formatting that way. If you do, once again, if you do a bunch of formatting and then you want to turn this back on, it will warn you, but then it'll reset everything. There's a lot of stuff in Power Apps that does that resets all your work, which leads me to like my last point is do all your formatting at the end. So get all your data on here, get everything working business rule wise, and then do your formatting at the very end, because there will be lots of times that you'll have to reformat everything if you get it down to, if you get everything just perfect, it'll get all messed up. If you want to move fields around on the form, let's go to this one's easier to see, I think. Actually, no. You can. There's 2 different ways that you can actually move fields around. On the right side here, if you click on this edit fields, you can drag these around. So if I want to move project submitter up, I can do that. So then it puts it up here at number 2. You can actually just drag these fields too. So if we kind of click and get this, you could drag this to be over here. So it's a little bit finicky, but I think that the easiest way to actually get them to move around is to drag them from this screen. If you want to add more fields from SharePoint, if you add fields from SharePoint and you want to add them in, you can click on this ellipsis here, and then you can, sorry, that's add field. And then this, you can add in the other fields from your SharePoint list. If you have, along those same lines, like if you want to kind of do a little bit of grouping with your fields and maybe you want to add in like a header or something, under that edit fields, you can do this add a custom card. So then it just puts in data card 1 here. So I'm going to put a little bit of a space between project status and this title field here. So I'm going to drag this up and put that in there. So now I can make this like full, and I'm also going to put this in. And then I could put in just like a text label here of something like so you can kind of see that this is some spacing for the form itself. So it does allow you to, to get a little bit of extra spacing in there, and then you don't have to mess around too much with the, the sizing of the actual data cards. So use the custom cards there to do a little bit of extra spacing if you want to get some grouping going on within the Power App. The other thing is with spacing itself. So if you wanted to make, here, let me move this one over here so you can see this better. So let's say I wanted to make this attachments field smaller. Like if you look at me, I'm dragging this up and it doesn't move. So this took me the longest time to figure out as well. So I could not get this to move. So look at the fields. So if I click on attachments, there is this error message that is sometimes stuck at the bottom. So if I click on error message, it's going to highlight it way down here. Sometimes they get moved way to the bottom, and that will prevent you from actually making your fields smaller. So what you have to do is just drag that up And then you can see that this allows me to make that container whatever size I want it to be. So be aware of those error messages. And that error message is essentially like validation. So if I have a required field and I don't fill it out, and then a text will pop up that says like, you need to fill this out. That's what I mean by error message. So the error messages are not required. I sometimes just delete them because I don't, if it's not a required field, I don't generally use them, but just be aware that they can sometimes get stuck at the bottom. The other thing is you can do a little bit of theming. So if you just want this to not look like white on white, you can click on SharePoint form, on form screen, and then there are some built-in themes here. So then if you could just change this to like lavender, and then it'll, make it look a little bit nicer. You can change the fonts, like everything is very customizable, so you can make it look a little bit prettier. But I think those built-in themes are great. I believe that these are run through like the accessibility standards for the colors and the contrasts and such, so that you don't have to worry about that. Any questions on the simple formatting of this?
Not on the simple, but there was one. I didn't want to interrupt that Corey is asking. Do we have to use the form control, or can we have free form inputs and then build a patch function to write to the record at the end?
Absolutely. Yes, to answer that question, yes, you can. You don't have to use the form control. For the sake of this presentation, we're using the form control because that's what's embedded in the SharePoint list form. But you're correct. You do not have to use that. If you wanted to, because of the way we started, which is went to the SharePoint list and clicked on the customized forms, that's why this is all baked in. Otherwise, you could just go create a Power App and then, add in your fields and then use like a patch at the end to patch the record. But it is definitely way easier to get started this way. But to answer your question, yes, you can do that. All right, so some other quick fun things about the formatting too is there are two things: components and company branding. That's a really common one I get, is like, we want to bring our own company theme into this form. So first of all, let's look at components though. This is a sample that. Sorry, I'm getting an echo of myself. So this is a sample that I took straight from a Shane Young video. Like, sharing is caring, I'm not gonna lie. So I did link it in the back of this, but Shane talks about how to build components for your forms. So they're essentially little headers that you can put on the top of your forms to make them look uniform. So it's a good way to get some company branding into your forms. And the nice thing about headers is that components that people can't edit them. So what I did here is I just created a new component. I'll just do this from scratch. And then you can, do the width, I think it's 1185, and then the height is 100. And then I want to do the background fill. So this one I took from Matt Devaney's article about how to bring in you can bring in a custom color palette for your Power Apps, and he puts it on the on start. So what he does is, if we come back to the app for a second, so we click on app and then go to the on start, there is a command here. So what he does is he just sets this global variable of app colors, and then you can bring in, almost all of the companies have this custom color scheme. So you can bring in these colors and then give them labels. So then you can leverage them in your apps. So for example, if I want the header to be this color here, if I kind of highlight that, I can see what it is down here, or primary 2 might be a little bit better. So let's try that one. So let's go back to components. Oops. And I want this fill to be, so I'm just going to reference that global app colors dot primary 2. And then you can leverage your company color right there. And I can do primary 1. Like, you can just take those hex colors and put them in the fill here as well. But if you put them in the onStart, that really gives you, it's a global variable, so you can use it anywhere in your app. And if your company ever does a rebrand or something, you could just go swap out that hex code, and then you don't have to worry about where it's embedded everywhere in your form. So I thought that was a pretty genius thing. Like I said, I did include the link to that in my sources as well, but it's a really easy way to bring your company colors in. And then the other piece I did on that other component was I added in my picture and my name. That's a really easy way to just like a warm fuzzy for users on the form. So what you can do here is just insert, and I'm going to grab an image. And I'm going to bring in user dot, oops, sorry. Is it user dot image? Okay. So then it brings in the image of the person who's logged in. And then also I can do one for like a text label, like welcome Heidi Jordan. So let me change this to white so we can see it. And so in the text here, I'm just going to do welcome, put an and to concatenate the two. And then this is going to be user dot, and here's the things I can pull about that user. I'm going to do full name. So then you've got your header there. I'm going to add in one more label for, like, this is my, just leave it like that. This is our document control form. You could put something like the submission date up in the top, you know, but I'm just including the name and picture for now. All right, so this is my component. So now I want to add this to the top of my form. So what I'm going to do is grab the form area. I'm just going to scoot it down a little bit because I'm going to put my component right here. So we're going to do insert, custom, and I did component 2, and it puts it right there on the top. So now if I'm a user, so these components you can deploy globally. So you can set up component libraries for your organization, and you could push out, you know, a component for a certain department's forms. And then they can go ahead and import these into their Power Apps. And then when they're editing their Power Apps here, you notice they can't click on this. They can't change anything about this. So it's a good way to push that you know, consistency among apps with the colors, and then they can't actually change anything about it there. So then it puts that nice header on the top of the form. So those are, that concludes my form, very basic form design. I build ugly apps. I think that's another thing Shane Young says all the time, but I build ugly apps and it's okay. But these are some ways you can kind of make them look a little better without requiring too many skills. Any questions on formatting and form design? We have just a couple slides left. So I do want to just cover the most intimidating part of Power Apps, which is that empty bar at the top. So let's go to here. And I'm going to go back to this one. All right, so the most intimidating part is this right here at the very top. When you first get into Power Apps Designer, you know, you're like, okay, on the left side, I can see the fields, that's fine. In the middle is where I design my form, got it. The right side is, you know, pretty much the same as the left side looking. What is this up here? So what I want you to know about this is the left side is just a property and the right side is what you can set it equal to. So if we zoom out a little bit here. So if I click on the form right here, these are all the things about that form that I can change. So I can change, you know, the data source of where it's pulling from. I can change the fill, the border color, you know, I can change all these things about that form, and I can change it to these values. So if I have the fill right now is this. I can change that about my form. So don't be intimidated by this bar and the expressions that go within it, because there's IntelliSense enabled. And now we have Copilot too, which helps with a little bit of these expressions. But just to kind of understand the IntelliSense portion of it, I've got a sample here. So for this one, oops, sorry, I gotta get back to my other demo screen. This one. All right, so with, demo formatting, sorry, I'm on the wrong one. Okay, so with that IntelliSense that I was mentioning, if you don't know what to put in these fields, that's okay. So you can try Copilot. I tried it for this example and it kind of gave me the right answer. So it's getting better. But if you have no idea what to put in there, use the IntelliSense. So simple example, if I have this project status drop down here, it just displays the values of new, in progress, complete. I want this text field to show me what's in this box. Okay, very simple example. So where I want to put the data is in this text box. So I know that I want to be this data card value 4, okay? And it's going to be the default value of it. So I want this to show me what's in this dropdown. So this is a good case for why you rename your controls, because I want it to be whatever is in that dropdown control, and I renamed that to proj status DD here. So I'm just going to say, all right, I want this to be proj status DD. So you notice that it starts filling in what it thinks you mean. So you click on that, and then you click the period, and then that will give you the next set of options. So if you don't know for sure, this is going to be whatever value is selected. So I'm going to show you the wrong way first. So I'm like, okay, I want the project status dropdown. I want the selected items in there. And it's still red, so it still wants something from me. So I click on that. And now when I don't get an additional set of fields, that means that I have the wrong formula. There's nothing left for me there. So I'm going to go ahead and back up. My goal here is to get rid of the red squiggles. So I'm going to try select it again. There's another selected here. And then I hit and then the last one here is value. So these statements generally end in value or result is generally what you'll see. And you'll see a little bit of preview here. So right now it's telling me that that value is actually blank, which is true. So let's see, make sure that I got the right formula. So let's give the form a test. If I click on this and I click new, then we see the new value here, or in progress. So moral of the story is don't be afraid of that bar up there. Use that IntelliSense and use Copilot too. Like I said, I typed in exactly what I wanted it to do, and it was about 97% on. So, all right, I am going to just kind of go through the rest of the stuff here. There's a couple of good things to know. The visibility, you can set values equal to each other, and for formatting, you can set them equal to each other. And what I mean by that is, so for example, on this project submitter column, let me quickly switch this into a one column form. So if I wanted everything to align with this, turn the snap columns off too. If I wanted everything to align with this and to be this wide, and I want all my columns to fill down the whole form, you can actually just click on this one and go to the width of this box, and I can set it equal to the title box. So title data card 1 dot width. So then you'll see that that one kind of shrunk. So you can set all your boxes equal to the width of the top one. So then when you're doing your resizing, everything will resize together. And the same thing works for the visibility. So if I have, you know, that instance at the beginning where we said that if the form is new, I want to hide project status, you could say if this field is, you know, if it's a multiple choice or something, you can say if this selected is this value, then hide all these things. So you can do that same thing with that visibility function. Also, you can, the other thing I do with the button is this form valid control. So when you're filling out all of the fields and you want to make sure that everyone fills out their required fields before they are able to submit the form, you can do that with the form valid function. So let me show you that. So if I click on the button here, this is the submit button for the actual form itself. So if I go to display mode, so I have a expression here. If SharePoint form 1.valid, then edit, otherwise disabled. Valid means that all required fields are filled in. So if we zoom out here again, let's preview this. So I must be missing a required field. So I put something in there. So now my button is disabled, or sorry, now it's enabled because I filled out all my required fields. So if I get rid of that, then you can disable that again too. This is a really good way to do conditional requirements. Sometimes, you know, SharePoint, like people say they're required to fill out all these forms or these fields on the form, but it's technically not required in SharePoint. So how do you do that? This is how you do it, is use those rules and the display mode and that valid function. Also, I also sometimes turn the submit button green. So then when it's, right now it's navy blue, but whenever then all the fields are filled in, the submit button will be green, and then the user knows they're good to go to submit the form. All right, so I got to get to step 6 here. So I'm going to quickly move on to step 6. And this one is the defaults. So one thing to be aware of is that when you're creating these forms, when the form is new, like I want to default, let's say for the submitter, you want to default it to their name because that's the nice thing to do. So, but then when you open the form again, the form default will take effect and it'll actually put it to your name again. So you got to be careful when you're configuring these forms that not everything is just built in, by default. So you got to be aware of that logic. So let's take a look at that and what I mean by that. So I got my submission form here, my project submitter, and let's go look at the defaults. So I think I actually put this on a different one. Hold on. Project submission list 2. Right here. All right. So continue. So the project submitter field here. So when I click on that, there are a bunch of defaults too, so be aware of that. The actual data card itself has a default. So the default for the data card is this item.projectSubmitter, meaning whatever's in that SharePoint list, it's going to pull that field. So that's the default for the whole card. But for the actual dropdown people picker itself, if you click here, there's a couple different defaults. There's default and default selected items. Default is for like text fields, and default selected items is for dropdowns and people pickers. So there's some code here, which I have in my slides, so you don't have to worry about copying this down or anything, but it says if that form mode is 1, meaning if this form is new, then populate this claims information, grab the current user, populate that people picker, so it'll be the current user filling out the form. Otherwise, use whoever's in that project submitter field. So that's how you ensure that when they reopen the form that it doesn't overwrite with, with your name as you reopen the form. All right. So I did put a little note card together here of this is the entire design process that we just did. So if you are going to go ahead and try this out, this is what you need to do to create your list, work backwards, click on that customize form, determine your formatting options, especially the landscape and the portrait and how many columns you're going to have. Determine which fields are visible on the new and edit, and then consider your defaults, like I just mentioned, like the submitter, the date submitted, and then do your design at the end. And then you can publish and copy, which we didn't really show how to do. So let me just show you how to finish this out. Once you've got everything done and you're ready to go, so all you got to do is click on this publish up here. And then it will go ahead and you can click publish to SharePoint and it will publish your changes. If you're not ready to publish, you can just click save and it'll save your form for the next time you want to go back in and click on that customize forms. But once you do publish this, the way you get to this is you click on that add new item and then that will load up your form. And then, sorry, this is not the one that we customized, but if you want to get a link to the form, if you don't want to send your users directly to the SharePoint list, you can click this copy link. And then that is what you can use to actually link your people to the new Power App form that you just created. So that's kind of full circle. After you publish it, then go click on new item and click on copy link. And then you'll have your Power App there. If you don't like what you did and you want to get rid of it, you can just click on your list settings and come into this form settings here under general settings. And then there are a couple options here. There's, if you have, you can click on this delete custom form. If this is selected, you'll have to just change it back to use default, and then you'll see that delete custom form option. And then that wipes your Power App entirely, and you can start over if you want to. But that is kind of the full circle. So real quick, I know I've got about 2 minutes, so I've got just a couple more items that I want to, the considerations. So if you are thinking about doing this, having SharePoint Online is really the first. Users and everyone's set up in a SharePoint Online tenant is really your first step. Yes, you can use Power Apps with SharePoint On-Prem and a data gateway. There are limitations with it, so be aware of that if you do decide to go that route. SharePoint Online default is browser-based editing. I work with a lot of clients that were used to using SharePoint on-prem, and when they went to online, they're doing things like policy reviews, which rely on track changes. So track changes is not visible in the browser. So that was one thing that was a big hurdle for them to get over. You know, we're layering in this wonderful Power App approval process, but they couldn't get over the fact that track changes is only available in the client. So be aware of that browser-based editing with SharePoint Online. If you're going to build a form, they're going to want a workflow to go with it. Get ready for Power Automate. The integration's already there in the list, but really get ready for that and start looking at that as your next step. And then when if you do this customized form and you publish it, be aware of those connections. We didn't look at it, but within the Power App Designer there's a way to do data connections to other sources. So I just quickly want to show you so you understand what I'm saying. So in here, there's a way to do connections to other data. So if you click on add data, and then it pulls in all those data sources that are available for your Power Platform, which is like over 1,000. That's great. If you do that and you play with it, make sure you delete it. Because if you don't and you publish your form, it's going to publish that data connection, and then your users are going to get prompted to connect to those data sources, and then mass chaos ensues. So make sure you delete that. But when you do publish your form, you will get this prompt for the very first time, and it'll say so-and-so needs your permission to use, and then it'll have their email here. They need to click allow. This is just making sure that they can use the form. It's a one-time connection, and then it'll go away. So there will be some panic from users when they see that screen, but just ensure them that it's a one-time thing. So, all right, that is what I have for, I know I'm a little over here, but I'm going to put up my contact information and I'm going to take questions. I hope that you found this useful, and I hope that many of you were building Power Apps in the background while I was going over this. So I will pause there. Any questions?
Yeah, and if anyone feels free to come off mute, you can ask any questions as well.
You believed in. I see Tom has his hand up.
Yeah, one of the things that I found really frustrating is that being that when it pulls in the data from your list, when you're doing the design, it pulls in like the very first record. And if you've got fields out there that say, hey, if field A equals X, then show this. If field Y equals this, then show this other thing. It's really frustrating because you go, oh, I've got to go correct that field, and you don't see that field out there on the form because you don't have the right options selected to cause that to display. Really scared me when I had some more complicated ones. What I've taken to doing is either bring in another connection of a list of email addresses of people who can see everything on the form, or if it's just you, do a global variable, put whatever account is that you're using to do this, and then in that visible statement to say, hey, if that global admin, variable that you set is equal to the email address of the current user, show that. Otherwise, use whatever other logic you have to make it visible. And that way, when I'm doing testing with my one account, I can see everything on the form. So I make sure that I'm not going, where's this field that they said's broken? But then when I test as a normal person, I see it the way everybody else would.
Yes, that's a very common practice. I forgot about that. Yes, very helpful. I see a couple other. Corey, do you want to go ahead? I don't know if Corey's trying to come off mute, or how about we skip over to Randy while he's coming off mute? Oh, sorry, Corey's off mute now. Go ahead.
Is Corey back? Okay.
Yeah.
This is Randy Howe. So quick question for you, Heidi. It was a great presentation. But you're welcome. So one of the things that we sometimes struggle with, when to use a customized or an integrated app like you demonstrated today, and when to use a Canvas app. Because if we go Canvas, and then people want to open up new or edit or do something in the form itself or in the list, then they see that what you see is what you get, old Microsoft, unless you've duplicated your work and done two apps. So do you have any guidelines for maybe when to consider one versus the other?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's a multitude of reasons for sure, but I think that the biggest difference between the customized list form and the full-blown Canvas app is the ability to do ALM. the ability to have, with your full-blown Canvas app, you can have a dev environment and a UAT and a prod, and you can make those changes to it in dev, push it to UAT, and push it to prod. So it really gives you that whole life cycle of the form. And also another reason why you would want to use a full-blown Canvas app is if you want to connect to something other than just SharePoint. It integrates, you can do it with Dataverse or SQL, any other data source, but I think that if your users are used to using some InfoPath, for sure, the customized list forms is the best way to go because it already has that baked in integration. And if they're familiar with InfoPath and that baked into SharePoint, I think that's the one reason I would definitely use it for that. I would say it's really good for light forms. Light meaning like they're not going to do, they're not going to be submitting like 20 of these a day. Maybe it's like a once a month or a couple times a month request for travel or something like that. Some sort of light things that don't require a lot of complexity behind it, and it won't really need to go through that whole ALM lifecycle. And then also licensing too. There's definitely licensing considerations. If you're going to be using the full-blown Power App and like I mentioned, this one is really, if you have a SharePoint license, you can use Power Apps for this. So that's another, like I said, there's many reasons, but I hope that those help high level.
Great, they did. Thank you.
Thanks. Corey, sorry, I saw you were able to get off mute there.
That's okay. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, perfect. Okay. What I was trying to say before, are there limitations regarding the app dimensions that SharePoint will accept in this development setting? Can I use the full custom dimensions, or do I have to use one of their presets, like when I'm adding a Power App to a SharePoint page using the web part?
It is very limited. So whatever we design with this customized list form, it's that landscape and the portrait are the only two options that I really have to embed this, because it doesn't, I think that there is a Power App like web part though too that you can embed, and that's also very limited. I would say that if you need to do anything with that, I would use the full-blown Canvas app is my suggestion. I see Jason put his hand up. I don't know if he's going to add to this or if he has another question, but that's kind of my guidance on that.
Thank you.
Yep. Jason, did you have something? Jason? Must be having trouble unmuting.
It's the dreaded double mute.
We can hear you now. Do you have a question?
May have to throw it in the chat, Jason, if you're having problems, it looks like.
Well, if there are, again, there's my contact information. If you do have additional questions, please feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to answer questions.
Is that better?
Yes, that's better.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
It was a Bluetooth connection issue, so I just had to turn it off and on. First of all, great job on the presentation, Heidi. That was the first time I had a chance to see that, and you did a great job for someone who's new to kind of navigating that. So
Sure,
thank you for that. My question is really just around the Copilot. Do you know, some of our users, I think, are getting some marketing pieces where they're assuming that Copilot might be able to do everything for them if they just tell Copilot what they need, but I'm assuming that's not the case. Would you be able to talk a little bit about what it can and can't do, so we can kind of just better understand what the scope of Copilot is with the Power Platform?
Yeah, for sure. I have opinions. I know there's many other Microsoft people that may be able to fill this one in for me, but I feel like it can absolutely help with, you're not going to need to, it can get you 80% of the way there, but if you don't really know what the form is doing, you're not going to be able to troubleshoot it. That's what scares me. You're going to need some sort of, you're still going to need knowledge of how this all pieces together. But Copilot can absolutely help you with those difficult formatting things, like that IntelliSense and the box I was saying, like how do I get this value in there? And then you spend hours scouring the internet. I think Copilot can help you with those kinds of things, but in the sense of, you're still going to need to know some kind of background and how all these inner workings go together. But anyone else from Microsoft have any input, or anyone else on the call on Copilot and Power Platform?
I think you summed it up right. I mean, I think any part of Copilot, whatever you're using, you need to have some sort of foundational understanding. So I think you're right about 80%. It can get there, but you do need to know what you're trying to accomplish and understand some of the at least 100 to maybe 200 level knowledge. I don't know.
Absolutely.
Anybody else have any other comments?
I've used it in Power Automate, and yeah, it'll give you just kind of really a basic structure, but you still have to know what you're doing as far as, filling in parameters and what you actually want it to do when it makes certain decisions and things like that. It's like it gets you partway there.
Great questions. Thank you, everybody. I will turn it back over to the